Hello, friends. Did you ever wonder about what happens to a home or a marital home during a divorce besides the kids and the pets? This is what's usually contested the most. So, we're going to talk about that today. Welcome back to the Divorce Broadcast. My name is Manny Segarra, and today we are lucky because we have two experts in the field. We have Irech Colon, attorney at law, to talk about the legal aspect of what happens to a home when there's a divorce. And then we have loan officer Katie Fitzgerald, she goes by Katie, who is going to talk to us about what happens on the mortgage side. So welcome, ladies. So as I mentioned in my intro, one of the hot button topics when it comes to divorce is what happens to the marital residence. I think in order to figure out what happens to a home, we need to figure out what happens to property in Florida. So can you give the audience a little bit of a rundown as to what the words equitable distribution mean?
Yes, of course. So one of the biggest aspects when you're getting a divorce is what the court does with all the stuff. And what I mean by stuff means assets and liabilities that either the parties have incurred during the marriage or prior to the marriage. So they do this process called equitable distribution, and they think about what is the best way to divide it.
Good stuff. So let's break it down for those of us who may not understand the legalities of it. And we're going to set the kids aside for purposes of this video. Can you give us, Irech, some examples of what you and your experience have seen Florida courts determine to be marital property or marital assets that are subject to division by the court?
So when it comes to marital assets itself, this could either be a business, it could be a property, it can be your jewelry, anything that can be classified as an asset or something somebody owns that was acquired during the marriage itself.
Okay, so in your time as an attorney, can you tell us some of the things that have actually surprised you?
You know what? You did make a quick mention of it earlier. And one of the things that a lot of people do not know is actually termed as property are pets.
No way.
Yes, pets are something that, as we all know, we all love and dear, but unfortunately, it is considered marital property.
Good stuff. So if you decide to get a fur baby, put it in your name, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about what happens with a home, because there's different situations depending upon whether or not the parties had the house beforehand or not. So walk us through some of the examples that you've seen.
So if there is a property, the first thing that needs to be determined is this property a marital asset or a non-marital asset? If it's marital, like I said previously, it was acquired during the course of the marriage. However, there are some circumstances where an asset can be a non-marital, meaning something that either spouse prior to the marriage acquired on their own. And a lot of times we have to determine whether this non-marital asset is now actually a marital asset since they used it during the marriage.
So it seems like the first question is, when was a property purchased? Is that what you're trying to, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
So let's break it down. What happens if the house or the marital residence was purchased prior to the marriage?
So if it was purchased prior, it would be considered a non-marital. However, after that's determined, you then need to look at, was there any commingling? It's a term that we use of whether there were some marital funds that were used to, let's say, pay off the party's mortgage. If there was some aspect that was marital that either helped improve it, enhance it, let's say adding a fence, all of that would be considered as how the commingling happens, where a non-marital property then becomes a marital property that then needs to be equitably distributed in divorce.
So can you tell the audience what about the party's paycheck? What if they use that to pay either for the mortgage or the taxes or the property insurance?
Yes, so it's very similar to the prior example. A lot of people like to say, well, it's my money and I paid for the mortgage. Unfortunately, because you are in a marriage and those funds went into a marital asset, at that point, your paycheck is marital. So at
Really?
that,
People
yes,
don't realize that. All right,
yes, they
that's good.
don't. They, there's some
Katie's like, wow.
spouses.
Katie's taking notes. She's like, oh, this is not this is not what I
Yes.
expected. Okay, so let's assume for the next part of this that it is a marital property. What are some of the ways that you have seen that the parties address how to either divide or deal with the marital home?
So once it is determined that it's a marital asset, it can either get sold, they sell it, they each get the property proceeds, and they're off their merry way.
That sounds kind of easy. So tell everybody option number 2.
Let's say one party really wants the property, right? So it's awarded to one party and they will have exclusive use. Unfortunately, there are different types of ways that can happen, or by better way, caveats of that can happen. Sometimes it can be there's a child involved, so the court will consider, well, until the child is 18, let's say dad gets to stay in the property, and then it could be sold. Let's say option number 2 is the parties want to reserve their interest in the property and they want to be nice. They're like, okay, wifey, you can keep the house, but in 20 years, I want to cash in my interest. And then they sell it. And then rarely, very rarely, sometimes both parties just want to keep it.
Uh-oh.
They can both keep the property and maybe use it as an investment property. And then if at some point down the road they want to sell it, then they can do that and have an agreement as how the house will be sold and how the proceeds will be sold later down the line. So
all right, I think that's a pretty great explanation of the different options. Is there a particular option that you have seen occur more often than not in your experience?
yes, so that brings me to the last harder and not that easy way of doing it. When one party keeps it, but there's still an encumbrance on the property. So lots of times they will opt to do a refinance. The party that wants the house will have an option for a certain limited time to be able to refinance the mortgage in order to remove the other spouse's name from the mortgage. In the event that they can't refinance or assume the loan, then they'll just have to sell the house and divide the proceeds. But the best way for you to know if you can refinance or assume the loan is to reach out to your friendly, dear old mortgage loan officer.
I think this is a perfect segue to the other expert that showed up at our conversation today, and that's Miss Katie Fitzgerald. Can you tell everybody, usually when do you get involved when you hear that a divorce is going on?
If there is a mortgage or title situation associated with the properties, you should call me immediately.
Immediately. So when you're hanging out thinking, oh, I'm going to file for divorce, call your girlfriends and then call your mortgage officer. I think that's the order of things. All right, good. So can you tell everybody kind of what the nuts and bolts of the process is to qualify for a mortgage?
The first thing I'm definitely going to need to take a look at is all your financial documents. This includes your taxes, your bank statements, anything financially that you share with your partner. The other thing we look at is income, debt, credit scores, and market environment. We look at all those things to qualify you on your mortgage.
Got it. Okay. And how long does this process usually take? Is there some sort of document that you give people to let other people know that they can afford this mortgage? Like, how does that work?
So there's a pre-approval process.
Okay.
After looking at all your financial documents, then the mortgage loan officer can then approve you to a certain amount. That takes anywhere from 2 to 3 days to pre-approve someone. But in overall closing, that's a 45-day process.
Got it. So if, let's say that Irech was working on a case and she went to like a mediation conference and she was able to obtain an agreement where her client, let's use the example of the wife again, because that's what we used, she gets to keep the property. How long should Irech be giving that client in order to try to qualify for a mortgage?
At least 2 weeks maximum,
Okay.
just to make sure that they qualify throughout the pre-approval process.
And then to get approved, the total length of the approval process to have the mortgage.
I'd like to say anywhere from 45 to 90 days. It really depends on the situation.
Got it. Okay. So, when people get divorced, they're going through it and they may be a little
They're
bit
in a tough spot.
Yes, they are. So what are some of, at least in your experiences, what are some of the obstacles that some of the clients have encountered when they're going through a divorce or when they're trying to apply for a mortgage under these circumstances?
Well, first off, most cases after divorce, you're going to have to refinance your mortgage, and that removes one spouse from any responsibilities associated to the mortgage. And that can be a obstacle in itself if that one spouse or person that wants to take over the mortgage can qualify for the mortgage. If not, they're going to need a non-occupant co-borrower, someone that doesn't live in the home that helps them qualify for the mortgage.
Ooh, that's a good point because up until that point, they usually were looked at as a pair with their spouse, if I'm understanding
Yes.
correctly. So,
Most married couples apply for a mortgage together, but throughout the divorce process, they're going to need to qualify on their own, which means that they need enough income and other liabilities to be looked at.
okay. And can you give some examples of like who are the family members that usually jump on board? I mean, obviously their teenage child can't be one of them, right? Because they don't.
It
You
needs to be
want it.
someone over 18.
Okay, so you try to find
Um,
the grandpa has a lot of money. Are we looking for grandpa to be on it?
Yeah, so usually a candidate is a family member. That's what I
Okay.
usually see. And you're looking for someone with good credit and that has the money to support you in income.
Okay. And how about, is there any other obstacles? Because you mentioned something about good credit. What are some of the things that you've seen regarding credit? Is that also an obstacle in some of the cases?
So, one of the issues I see in divorce is non cooperative parties will kind
No.
of it.
Irech, you mean that people that are going through a divorce are non-cooperative? Can you believe that?
I can't say I'm too shocked, actually.
Okay, so the spouse is not
So,
cooperative. So what happens?
non-cooperative parties will usually attack each other in a way by not paying bills, which is
Oh,
an awful
yes.
situation because then it affects the other person's ability to apply for a mortgage in the future.
How long does it take to get some of these derogatory reports off of your credit? Do you know more or
It's
less?
very tough. It usually takes up to 7 years, which is why it's so important not
Wow.
to mess up from the very beginning.
Got it. Is there certain employment statuses? Like, is there a difference between people who have maybe like a W-2 job or someone self-employed? Is there
Yes.
differences or do those people have different?
So to qualify for a mortgage, you always need income. The difference is W-2 versus self-employed. W-2 is just easier to qualify because you usually have a normal rate of income. If
Okay.
you're self-employed, it's a little different, and we're going to take a look at your business tax returns.
How many years do you think you look back at when it comes
We
to?
always look 2 years back to show either that you have positive income or negative income. If you have negative income, then you're in a bad spot.
Okay. Is one of the issues that comes up, I know, for divorce attorneys is that oftentimes one of the parties either receives child support or receives alimony from the other spouse.
That actually helps the mortgagee in the sense that we use that as income towards your overall file.
Got it. A lot of times the equity in a home can be used to try to buy out another spouse. Is that something that you've seen as well?
Yes, this is called a cash out refinance, where
Okay.
one spouse is using their ability to take on the mortgage and the equity of the home to pay off their other spouse.
And how do you suggest people go about that?
To look at home equity in general, you're going to need an appraisal. If the couple's getting along and working together, you just need one appraiser. If not, you're going to have to use two appraisers and use the average of both. The equity in the home we're looking at is how much of the mortgage has been paid off.
Got it. Okay. And then I guess the last thing is I always hear, and this is a term that I hear all the time, but I'm unfamiliar with exactly how it works. Debt to income ratio.
So, debt to income ratio is extremely important in evaluating if you qualify for a mortgage. We're looking at your debts or your liabilities on a monthly basis. This can include credit cards, car leases, even child support that you're paying out. Student loans count as well. So, any debts that you have in general or that you're paying on a usual basis. Then we're taking that and comparing it to how much you make monthly, which offsets it a little bit. So your debt to income ratio pretty much allows the loan officer to assess if you qualify or not based on how much money you make compared to how many debts you have.
Okay, is there a standard in the industry that mortgage officers are looking at?
So essentially, you just want to make sure that you have low debt. A couple credit cards is okay. That actually helps your credit compared to how much you're making. You don't want to be living over your means.
Got it.
So that's what we're evaluating.
Okay, so before we wrap up, give us a pro tip you wish everybody would know before they walked in the door and said, Katie, I'm getting a divorce. I need to get a mortgage. Give them a pro tip.
You definitely want to talk to your mortgage officer about the options that you have. Most times you're going to need to refinance, so you want to know who can afford to be on the mortgage.
All right, and if people want to reach you, give a shout out to your company and best contact information that they can reach you at.
I work for Columbus Capital Lending, which is a local mortgage lender to South Florida. The best way to contact me is through my cell phone.
Good stuff. All right, Irech Colon, you're up. Pro tip.
I think one very key important thing that a lot of people might leave out in any kind of agreement or any kind of segue into wanting to keep a property is making sure that you understand what a quitclaim deed does. At the end of the day, if there is going to be a transfer of title and there is an involvement of a refinance or an assumption, definitely remember that a quitclaim deed does need to be done by somebody who specializes in the real estate world. To be able to complete that for you in order to do the transfer of title, but only when you've received your interest in the property. You never want to give over the big leverage before you get your money in the interest of the property.
Got it. Good stuff. All right. For those of you watching, please give this video out to friends and family who may consider trying to keep the marital residence and or trying to get a mortgage, whether or not they're in a divorce or not. You can reach our law firm at www.segarralawfirm.com. We have offices in Miami, Florida, and Irech over there in Orlando, Florida. Se habla español. Please do us a favor and like this video and subscribe to the Divorce Broadcast. And we will see all of you next time. Thank you.